This is good. This is good. Okay. Welcome, everybody, to 52 Living Ideas. Delighted to have Joia, Maritza, Rob, and Sherri back to talk about Romantic Manifesto. Today is very special. We're talking about Victor Hugo. He's my favorite novelist by far. I keep going back to him whenever I need any inspiration. So it's wonderful to be talking about him. So we'll start with Rob. Rob.
All right, thanks. All right, so the chapter we're looking at here is Ayn Rand's introduction to 93, or Quatre Ventres, the original French title, one of Victor Hugo's novels. I'm actually going to be talking about Les Miserables, and not the novel, but the musical. But there's two reasons why I'm doing that in the context of what she's writing about 93. And the first reason is that right here in like the second paragraph, she says, she's talking about Victor Hugo. She says, he is virtually unknown to the American public. Now, this says copyright 1962. So she's writing this in 1962. The book was published around 1969. And that radically changed in 1985 when the musical came out of Les Miserables. And Victor Hugo it was this vast, huge phenomenon, international phenomenon, very big phenomenon in the US. And Victor Hugo became a household name all of a sudden. Just to give you a sense for that, the size of that phenomenon, is the fact that people now just refer to Les Miserables just as Les Mis. And if you say that, people know what you're talking about, right? It's been shortened to an abbreviation. And if people did their homework assignment and they watched the 10th anniversary performance of the musical, it's a stage performance of the musical, sort of a concert performance of the musical. If you watch to the end of that, they had this thing where they bring out 17 different Jean Valjeans singing the song, Can You Hear the People Sing? 17 different Jean Valjeans singing in a bunch of different languages. Mm-hmm. They have the Icelandic Jean Valjean singing in Icelandic. They've got the Japanese Jean Valjean singing in Japanese. And it just shows the vast scale of the phenomenon, all the different countries that the musical was performed in, all the different languages it was translated into. And for now that was 10th anniversary, that was late 90s, but for a more recent example of that, I dug up late in December 2019, there were a series of protests in Hong Kong. And you had this thing, I think it's a train station. The protesters are occupying this train station, and they start singing, Can You Hear the People Sing? Which is this, the song of the revolutionaries in 1832 in Paris in the musical. And here they are in Hong Kong fighting against an oppressive government. And you could even argue a monarchical government in practice. Here they are rebelling against an oppressive government, and they're going back to Victor Hugo by way of this musical that was produced. It was now the interesting history of it. I've talked a little bit about this before. There were these two guys, Schoenberg and I can't pronounce his last name, but these two French guys who produced this as a concept album. It was just a stage performance of a bunch of songs strung together. And they were doing this in a French context where, everyone in France in high school reads Les Miserables. And so everybody knows the story, and nobody has to, you don't have to tell people what the story is. You just do the songs and everybody will know what it's about. Well, somebody got this album into the hands. This is done as a couple stage performances and, sort of produced as an album. And then nothing further came from it. But then somebody got that into the hands of Cameron Mackintosh, a producer in London's West End theater district. And he listened to it and said, yeah, there's really something to this. And then they rewrote it with English lyrics and some extra songs put in to help fill in the bits of the story that people might not know, and bringing it to an English audience. It was a huge hit on the West End in London. It then came over to Broadway, was a huge hit here, had a national touring production. And I saw it in Chicago in, 1988 or something like that.
In London too.
And we saw it in London many years later. Mm-hmm. But I saw it twice in Chicago when it was there, and I was in college. So, about the time I was first reading this book, and she's saying Victor Hugo is virtually unknown today, I was going off to see this massive international hit based on his work. Now, the other reason I want to talk about the musical of Les Miserables in this context is that when they adapted it from a novel to a musical, they actually changed the theme of Les Miserables. And here's the thing, they changed it to be exactly what she names here as the theme of 93. Mm-hmm. All right, so let's first talk about the theme of Les Miserables. Now, I think, okay, here I'm gonna get myself in trouble.
Yeah, Joia and Maritza can correct you later.
Yeah, we'll see. I think Ayn Rand got her statement of the theme of Les Miserables wrong. And, I contradicting Ayn Rand about Victor Hugo is, something she felt so strongly about, makes me a little nervous because, here she, I don't know if she would have been happy with me, but I think she actually got the theme wrong because she says the theme of Les Mis is the injustice of society to the lower classes. Now, this is a couple chapters back in the book that she says that. And, we're probably here. Yeah. At the same time she says that, she says the theme of Atlas Shrugged, her own novel, is the role of the mind in human life, right? So notice that she gives her own theme is stated in these extremely broad philosophical, sort of metaphysical and epistemological terms. She states the theme of Les Mis in more of a social and political terms. I think that's the problem. I think you need to state the theme of Les Miserables in more metaphysical terms, because Victor Hugo was, if nothing else, he was a very metaphysical writer, right? He was operating at this very metaphysical level of what is the nature of man. And so the way I would state the theme of Les Mis is that the least can become the greatest. The least most insignificant man can become the greatest man. And he actually tells us this. Now, there's a great quote now. I've had it up on your computer, but
I can pull it back up.
I also can just do it over here. I'll do it here. Okay, he has a section where he actually tells us what he's doing in the novel. And this is a early chapter in Les Mis called A Tempest in a Skull. And this is after, for those who know the story, this is after Jean Valjean has had the encounter with the bishop, and he is wrestling with his conscience again, going through this period of reflection of do I need to radically change my life after this encounter with the bishop? And so the chapter A Tempest in a Skull is all about this internal conflict he has. And there's a passage there, and I cleaned it up a little because you kind of have to do that with Hugo. But here's the basic idea of the passage. Quote, "There's a sight greater than the sea, and that is the sky. There is a sight greater than the sky, and that is the interior of the human soul. There gods do battle, as in Homer. There are dragons and hydras, as in Milton, visionary circles, as in Dante. To write the poem of the human conscience, if only of one man, even the most insignificant man, would be to swallow up all epics in a superior and definitive epic." Right? So that's what he's telling you what he's doing in the novel. So Jean Valjean is the most insignificant man, and Les Miserables is the superior and definitive epic. And so that theme of the least can become the greatest goes throughout the book. Throughout the book. We're talking about the book now. Okay. And you can see it in, there's another little passage in the book that is revealing that way. And then Shoshana Milgram, who has lectured a lot on Victor Hugo, turned me on to this idea that there's a chapter called Cambronne's Word. Now, this is part of this long, giant essay that he sticks in the middle of the novel about the Battle of Waterloo. And it's very tangentially related to the events of the novel. But, he's a brilliant historical essayist, so he can't help himself. He has to stick this long essay about Waterloo into the novel. But in the middle, in part of that, there is something that is thematically centrally related to the theme of the book. And that is this issue is the of Cambronne's Word. Now, Cambronne is the commander of the last surviving square of French soldiers during the battle. And at one point, they're surrounded by the English. They're the holdouts. And the English say, pause the battle. And they say, give them a chance. Brave Frenchmen, surrender. And Cambronne replies back with a Gallic obscenity. And that's what Cambronne's word is. And he's basically, and what Hugo says is basically he admires this defiance and this dedication that he had, that he would die rather than surrender. And so he says, the least of words, the lowest of words can become the greatest. So that's what Cambronne's word is, part of that same theme. And for those who've seen the musical, will recognize that as the theme of the song Little People, where Gavroche, who's this street urchin living in the streets of Paris, gives this song about how we may seem little and we may seem small, but when we'll fight like 20 armies and we won't give up. So it's this idea that the downtrodden lower classes may seem miserable and awful, but we're strong and powerful and we will win. And Gavroche, I think, actually really has to be understood as a central character. As I've thought about it more and more, I realize how central he is, because here he is, this, like 10-year-old, this diminutive street urchin, totally poor, living out, on his own, living by his wits in the street of Paris, and yet he is sort of he has Aristotle's great-souled man. He is a giant spiritually, and that really sums up the theme of Les Mis, the novel, to me. Is you have someone who's diminutive on the outside and a giant spiritually. All right, so they changed that though when they went it over to the musical. So that's my case for why Ayn Rand was wrong about the theme of Les Mis, but they changed it when they go to the musical. And it's mostly a change of emphasis. They drop a lot of the politics and social commentary, which I think is probably to the good because it's all kind of outdated and not going to be as relevant today. But what they do instead is they change it to the theme that Ayn Rand states for 93 in here. She says that the theme of 93 is, let me see if I find it here. She says it's not about the French Revolution. The theme is about the issue of loyalty to values, as she states it this way. The emphasis he projects is not what great values men are fighting for, but what greatness men are capable of when they fight for their values. And so this leads to one of the things that she mentions too, as a hallmark of Victor Hugo, is that in his novels, they tend to be, the main conflict tends not to be between a hero and a villain, but between a hero and another hero, or someone who is, equal to the hero, somebody who's not bad, but is motivated by but is loyal to a conflicting set of values. And so you see that they bring that out in the musical very well. I think they do a better job in the musical than Hugo did in the original novel of bringing that out with the character of Javert, where he has this ballad he sings, an ode to the stars, where he's saying basically, that earthly law and order in his mind is the reflection of a cosmic order, and that he sees himself as the enforcer of this, cosmic order ordained by God himself. He is its enforcer here on earth, and that's why he has this dedication to law and order. And you see him, he's portrayed as an idealist in his own way, and so you have the revolutionaries who are trying to overthrow the government. You have the policeman who's trying to enforce law and order. You have Jean Valjean pursuing his values. You have all these different characters pursuing different things that motivate them, that different values that they are loyal to. A street urchin. You have Eponine, who's has this unrequited love for Marius. You have the student revolutionaries. You have all these this huge cast of characters, all motivated by some value that they care for very deeply, and they're willing to give everything for. And the brilliance of the musical, as they realized, is that they grasped the brilliance of Hugo's plot, and that they bring that all together in the Revolution of 1832. And they have the song that the first act close, this amazing first act close, is this song One Day More, where it starts with Valjean saying, one day more will determine my fate. And then every other character, this very large cast of characters, every other single one comes on saying the same thing, that this next 24 hours, this next day, the first day of this attempted revolution, is going to be what determines their fate. And so it's this idea of taking all these people passionately dedicated to their value, and loyal to their values, bringing them all together and having one event be the thing that determines their fate and the pursuit of their values all at the same time.
You're bringing up the one person that doesn't.
Well, I'm going to in a second.
Okay.
And as part of that theme, there's a couple of key moments I thought were part of that theme. And I want to mention these specifically because two of these were left out of the movie version that was done in 2012, the Hugh Jackman version with Hugh Jackman as Jean Valjean. There were two that were left out, and it was one of the reasons why I finally turned to being a little disappointed with the movie version, because these are two crucial things that are absolutely crucial to the theme. It showed that Tom Hooper, the director, didn't quite fully get the theme because he wouldn't have taken these out. And one of those is there's a scene where there's a confrontation between Valjean and Javert at the deathbed of Fantine. And they have this conflict, and Valjean overpowers Javert and escapes. But at the end of as this duet, they first sing a duet, and of course, then they have a battle. And at the end of it, there's this point where Valjean is saying to Fantine, "I promise I'll take care of your child, and I'll raise her, and I'll take care of her." And he ends with, "I swear to you, I will be there." And at the same moment, Javert is saying, "No matter where you can run and hide, I'll track you down. I swear to you, I will be there." And they end on that same line at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And that really captures exactly what Ayn Rand is talking about in 93, with the idea of it doesn't matter which values they're loyal to. The theme is the loyalty to values. So the important thing, Valjean and Javert are pursuing things that are that are contradictory to each other. If Valjean succeeds at what he's doing, then Javert will fail at his, and vice versa. But what's essential is that the same idea is behind it. I swear to you, I will be there. They're both swearing their loyalty to what it is that they value. So the way I would put it is the other key moment is that there's one character in the novel and in the musical who doesn't fit this. And I think everybody knows, probably if you've seen it, you know who that character is, and that's Thénardier, right? He's the one person who doesn't have any values that he's loyal to. And that's why this is a scene they cut out from the movie, but it's really important because he has this sort of manifesto he delivers in the gutters under Paris, because he's there looting the corpses of the people who've been killed in the revolution. And he gives this little manifesto about how I raise my eyes to see the heavens and only the moon looks down. And this is his way of, it's sort of a manifesto of atheism, but in Hugo's idea, that's synonymous with the idea of, it's his really statement that there are no values. There's nothing higher and better that I'm striving towards. And so it's his denial of all values and of anything important to be loyal to. And then what really struck me, and what I really realized is, because I said I saw Les Mis for the first couple times right after reading this book and right after reading this chapter on Victor Hugo. And I think it was really helpful that I had read this chapter, because when you get to the end of the musical, end of Les Miserables, there's this song that they reprised, the song from earlier on that will you join in our crusade? It's the Do You Hear the People Sing song from earlier. And earlier on in the musical, it's sung by the revolutionaries as their sort of revolutionary manifesto, join with us in the revolution. But at the very end of the story, it's brought back, and all the characters, every single character from the story, living and dead, comes back to reprise the song. And the lyrics take on a different meaning there, because it's not about the revolution anymore. So they said, will you join in our crusade? Who will be strong and stand with me? And what it means for them at that point is, I think even Javert comes back for that one, right? So it's clear that it's not about the revolution anymore. It's about the loyalty to values. That's the crusade you're being asked to join in. And like I said, I had just read this when I saw this the first time. So I was like, I recognize this. I know what they're doing. They are taking what Ayn Rand said about 93. That's what they're doing. And that's what the theme of this musical is. So the way I would put it is, the basic issue that Hugo is asking you, it really in all of his novels, and especially in that, but it ends up being the issue in this for the musical too, is the basic question is, what would you give for the things that you love? Would you give a little? Would you give a lot? Would you give something, or would you give everything? And if you answer you give everything, then congratulations, you are eligible to be a major character in a Victor Hugo story. Now, don't celebrate too quickly, because what he's also going to do is he's going to totally put you to the test on it. He is going to drive you to the absolute limit and say, do you really mean that? And he's going to invent a series of events that will make you actually make that choice to be willing to give everything for what you love. And maybe sometimes you as long as you make the choice, you'll be okay and you'll come out the other all right on the other side of it. But your chances are probably less than 50-50. So, but for him, the important thing isn't that you succeed at the end. The important thing is your willingness to give everything for what you love. And so that's what she's talking about as the metaphysical greatness of man that she sees, that Victor Hugo saw and portrayed in 93. And it's also, I think, the theme of the adaptation of Les Miserables that made Victor Hugo a household word once again, and especially in America.
Wow. Thank you, Rob. Wow. Sorry, Maritza, you go next.
I know, I was just thinking, how can I get out of being the next one in line? Rats.
You can right under the bus.
Yeah.
Say, I'm so glad I'm not Maritza right now.
Quiet, you. I'm gonna totally cheat. I'm gonna pretend that he didn't talk about Les Mis so wonderfully, and I'm gonna talk about, because there's another book to talk about, 93, right? So I read 93 before I read Les Mis, which is kind of good, because that 50-page scene of the Battle of Waterloo might have turned me off from reading more of his books. Probably not, though. His style was pretty awesome. So what in this chapter here, what I see is, well, I'm certainly, first I'm going to agree emphatically with the vision of, holding on to your values that is so clearly seen in all of Victor Hugo's works. I've read a few of his books, and it really is the central theme that shines through, even when he goes on his, epic tangents. I don't think he can help himself there, but they're all beautiful. So, they're not terrible. But I will say in 93, and I to a degree, I see the same thing in Les Mis, is that he's shining a spotlight on how it is that to an individual, every individual is going to face day in and day out these circumstances that will test one's resolve towards oneself. And he does it in simple things, he does it in bigger things. So the scene that I will always remember, that strikes me as the most poignant in 93, for those of you who haven't read the book 93, it's a fictional recounting of the French Revolution, Civil War, as it were. And there's a scene where there's a beggar, and this is closer to the beginning of the book. There is a beggar who comes across a man as yet unnamed in the story. And he views him from a distance and immediately recognizes him as this man that is on wanted posters. I'm oversimplifying this, but this is the gist of it. He's seeing our wanted posters, and there's like a huge gold reward for turning him in. The beggar, not only does he not turn him in, he offers him supper and safe lodging for the night. And then later on, it turns out this unnamed man, at that point, he goes on to be the leader of the white coats, as it were. So and he is vicious in his commanding. He like the next day or two after this beggar kind of gave him his life, he slaughters an entire village. and he captured, and including 2 women, and he captures the 3 children, which is actually, that's a big plot of the book. But the beggar comes across the village with all the soldiers that are killed and the 2 women that were left for dead, because one of them actually survives, the mother of the children, but they thought she was dead. And what he says when he's asked what's happening, and he learns that this Marquis, whose life he saved, is the Marquis who issued the order for this tragedy. He goes, oh, if only I had not saved his life. And he keeps going back to that point, like how somehow he feels responsible. And in his musings, because he's nursing the mother back to life, and there's a section further on while he's nursing her back, where he's musing about why and whether he should not have. And he's questioning to himself, why did I save his life? And what he had told the Marquis was that he had saved his life because countless times the Marquis had given him money when he was begging. And while the Marquis did not remember him, he remembered the Marquis because that money was his savior, his lifeline during those times of need. And in his musings, this beggar asks himself, why did I save his life? He says, he was like, he's turned out to be this horrible individual. But then he said, and yet I saved him because he was still a man. And that phrase to me, it's so like, I feel like it's in neon lights and it jumped off the page, and it's a small, quiet little line that all the flowery prose that you will find in that book, it is one of the simplest of lines, and yet it's the one that reached out and grabbed me. Why? Because that simple little line is saying everything that Victor Hugo says in all of his works, and what Ayn Rand admires so much. Despite the costs, I had to act in the manner that was true to that which I hold most dear. That's what I heard in that small little sigh that this old beggar said while musing on this. And I really think that's what Ayn Rand is pointing us to in this chapter. She is saying, Victor Hugo shows us how great we can be in character. The ideal is a man who will do everything in his power to be true to those values he holds most dear. And I'm going to stop there because Rob said everything else. Thank you.
Thanks, Maritza. Next up is Joia. Joia, go ahead.
Well, I'm definitely glad that I get to go after Rob and Maritza, because I wanted to talk about both Les Miserables and 93. And I wanted to even start with the very end of the musical version of Les Miserables, because I think it's just beautiful, the poetry of it. And as Rob was pointing out, the way this musical was created was so interesting in that it started as this French concept album. But then when the British producers took it over, they completely rewrote it into English. And then the English version became the standard version that all the other versions in all the other languages were based on. But the end line, the way that the musical ends, I think is just so beautiful and potent and powerful and really expresses this idea. So it goes, will you join in our crusade? Who will be strong and stand with me? Somewhere beyond the barricade, is there a world you long to see? Do you hear the people sing? Say, do you hear the distant drums? It is the future that they bring when tomorrow comes. Ah, tomorrow comes. And I love the whole idea of that first there's the vision, the somewhere beyond the barricade, is there the world you long to see? And the whole vision of tomorrow comes. And then the fact that you have to fight for it. think those lines just beautifully capture this whole theme that, as Rob is pointing out, it's in Les Miserables, it's in 93. It describes, I would say, the whole leitmotif of Victor Hugo that we see throughout all of these works in just a few beautiful lines, and beautiful lines in English at that. And I'll share that part of my personal history with this story was I encountered the musical first when I was a teenager. And I'm really glad I encountered the musical first, because technically I had picked up the book first. And I had read the first 50 or so pages, which were all about the character of the priest whom Jean Valjean meets. And that's the inspiration that allows Jean Valjean to turn his life around. But I had just read the first 50 pages and was like, what is this book all about? And didn't really get into it and put it down, and then didn't read it. And so it wasn't really until I encountered the musical and was able to see and grasp the theme of the musical that then I was able to pick up the book and really get the book. And I will wholeheartedly agree with Rob's version of what the theme of the book is. I think it's much more accurate and better than the version that Ayn Rand gives. And actually, I think is even more in line with the value that she sees in Les Miserables. And just as a point of reference, Ayn Rand's favorite character was Enjolras, who is the character who's the leader of the rebels on the barricades. She was inspired by his heroism. So I think that's even an important part to grasp, to even see the value she really saw in this. And then I wanted to then just read part of this chapter to then even connect with what I even see that we haven't talked about yet, that for me really is what makes Hugo such a fascinating writer, which is that he operates at this high level of metaphysical abstraction, as Rob was pointing out. And at the same time, he connects this so wonderfully to the concretes, maybe even more, I think, than sometimes it seems Ayn Rand gives maybe credit for a little bit. So I just wanted to read this one little part so we can then even jump in more to 93. So she says here, the fact is that 93 is not a novel about the French Revolution. To a romanticist, a background is a background, not a theme. His vision is always focused on man, on the fundamentals of man's nature, on those problems and those aspects of his character which apply to any age and any country. The theme of 93, which is played in brilliantly unexpected variations in all the key incidents of the story, and which is the motive power of all the characters and events, integrating them into an inevitable progression toward a magnificent climax, is man's loyalty to values. To dramatize that theme, to isolate that aspect of man's soul and show it in its purest form, to put it to the test under the pressure of deadly conflicts, a revolution is an appropriate background to select. Hugo's story is not devised as a means of presenting the French Revolution. The French Revolution is used as a means of presenting his story. And while I totally agree that Victor Hugo is certainly operating at this high level of metaphysical abstraction more than perhaps any novelist ever, I have my little line here that says that in another sense, the novel is also very much about the French Revolution. I put this line in that it is man of the eternal in man of the passing moment. And what I really love about Victor Hugo is how he really is able to do both, how he's able to have these really wide abstractions and then also the real in-depth love for the concretes. One of the things I see in Victor Hugo is his love for Paris and France. We know from his biography that by the time he was writing Les Miserables and in this later part of his life, he was in exile. And the way I see Victor Hugo is he loves Paris perhaps the way he would have loved one of his mistresses. There's that level of attention and care and focus on the details of the place and the situation, including the French Revolution. There is a real way in which this story is a conflict that is a conflict that Hugo himself perceived in the situation of the French Revolution, because on the one hand, he loved the politics of freedom that the Republicans were fighting for, but he also wasn't an atheist. He was also religious, and so he appreciated the values on the other side as well. And so I think just in being able to have both really wide abstractions and sort of operate at the level of the French Revolution, and then tie it into the conflicts of all of these different characters, bringing them together in this great plot, the way Maritza described it. To me, that really is the magnificent power of Victor Hugo, to be able to operate at all of these levels and bring them all together. So that's what I wanted to share.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Joia. So folks, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to now invite, Sherri.
Well,
Yeah,
now
keep
that I
going.
know, I just had, I had two little short lines that I wanted to add.
I thought you just wanted to be a sidekick today. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, but I thought that after I wanted to bring it back to the power of art, which is really kind of the point of the whole book all the way through. And so there's just two little lines that I wanted to read in case if you hadn't gotten a chance to read the chapter, or just to put focus on it again. One was Ayn Rand's description. This is at the very end of the chapter, where she writes, "I discovered Victor Hugo when I was 13, in the stifling, sordid ugliness of Soviet Russia. One would have to have lived on some pestilent planet in order to fully understand what his novels and his radiant universe meant to me then and mean to me now." And then she mentions, this is the same page, but at the top of the same page, she is writing also about, so that's explaining the power of Victor Hugo to her, but she's talking about the power of art in general. And she mentions this one thing about the sense of life. Hugo, the artist, paid for the lethal contradiction. She's talking about contradiction in his sense of life. Even though no other artist had ever projected so deeply a joyous universe as his, there was a somber touch of tragedy in all of his writing. I'm going to skip a few lines here and then mention, it's as if to him, it was the earth, not heaven, that represented the object of longing, which he could never fully reach or win. So even to the artist himself, she's talking about the power of that sense of life and how much it can impact both the reader and the person doing the creating.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Sherri. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to do a slightly different format. I'm going to make some comments about Hugo, brief comments. And then meanwhile, anybody who has read Hugo, I'm going to invite them to share what their, what they have gotten from Hugo, any thoughts that they have about Hugo. So you can go ahead and type exclamation mark if you would like to share your thoughts about Hugo. For me, I mean, the one word that summarizes Hugo is just grandeur of what human beings can be. And he does that better than anybody else, better than any philosopher, better than any, visual artist, musician. Each of them do that to some extent. But to me, that is really his hallmark. And that is shown in the most smallest of characters. Maritza was talking about this beggar. We're talking about Gavroche. I mean, any character. And that is there all the time. So you can see Jean Valjean talking in all, operating in all kinds of situations. And that leitmotif is there throughout. So that's like the heart of it. The thing that I love reading, one of the things I love about reading Victor Hugo is that on the top of that, his plots are the best that I've ever seen because they're so dramatic. And it's like things are surprising when they happen, but immediately afterwards you say, oh, that makes perfect sense. And he pulls it out like a cascading, there is a conflict that comes up, as it is being resolved, a bigger conflict will come out of it. And he does that like multiple times in the same. Never seen anything like that. And so those are the two things that kind of stand out for me. So it's like kind of walking into a completely different universe, because he doesn't actually see, acknowledge that, he doesn't see any reason why a human being be anything less than that. And that is true for almost all characters. Occasionally he will have a character to show, what, there is a person, this is possible, this crazy guy over here. But by and large, you have these, this grandeur. So that's what I love. All right. Does anybody who wants to share their view of Victor Hugo? Also, I would like to know how many of you are familiar with Victor Hugo. So depending on that, we can I'm either going to do Q&A directly if people are not that familiar, or we can do breakout rooms followed by Q&A. So I'm going to give you about 10 seconds while I recreate all of this, the breakout rooms. All right, would anybody like to share? You can just go ahead and type an exclamation mark. Right. Okay, Ash, give me just a second. I have to enable speaking here. Go ahead, Ash.
Okay, so it's actually been years since I've read much Hugo, but many years ago, I read through a lot of his stuff. I actually have a really nice set of the complete works of Victor Hugo. But I'm a little bit hazy on some of the details and things, but I definitely agree with a lot of what the panelists have said. And it was really, really fun to reread Ayn Rand's introduction to 93, because, some of the scenes that she talks about, really came back to me quite vividly. But I guess I would just maybe highlight some of what somebody's been mentioning in the chat here, ADZH Kindle Magenta. She talks about, or he or she talks about how Hugo was so much more than just a novelist. Like his plays, even before he became famous as a novelist, really helped launch the Romantic movement, and those are still worth reading. His poetry is often very, very good. His artwork, his pen and ink drawings are very interesting. He did illustrations for some of his own novels, like Toilers of the Sea, which you can get editions of that reproduce his own illustrations. Like even his love letters, a lot of his love letters have been published now and reprinted that you can get now. So those are fantastic. So I just definitely would recommend to people, even if you just know Victor Hugo from, Les Mis and maybe Hunchback of Notre Dame, like explore, or even 93, like explore some of his other works. Even some of his other novels are really, really fantastic. The Man Who Laughed is good. One of my personal favorites is actually a book called, translated into English as The Toilers of the Sea, which is very interesting for a Hugo novel because it's not as, like the scale of it isn't as epic in terms of like the whole societal thing. It's about one man trying to overcome like the forces of nature in order to win his love. And so to me, it's kind of like Toilers of the Sea compared to Les Mis or 93 is sort of like The Fountainhead compared to Atlas Shrugged for people who know Ayn Rand's works, where the theme is just not, like maybe that's not the best comparison because, The Fountainhead is about, independence. And so that necessarily has to have some social aspects to in relation to highlight the lead character's independence. But it really is much more about like one man's quest to achieve his values. And so it doesn't have quite the same variety and scope of like all of these different the permutations of people trying to achieve their values, but so it's not as broad, but it seems like it kind of goes deeper in a sense. So that's one that I definitely recommend. I don't know. Yeah, I guess that's pretty much all I want to say.
Thank you, Ash. Next up is Rupali. Rupali, what do you think of Hugo?
Hello. Shrikant, in my notes, I had the same word, grandeur. It's just the world that he portrays is so grand, and humans can achieve grand that grand stature while they are on earth. I think that is a big part. I wanted to say two things. One is about romantic literature that Ayn Rand points out, and I missed the beginning, so I don't know if Rob already covered this, but she talks about romantic literature coming into existence when there were politically free societies. And I think that is a very key point about how humans can use the power of their mind in a free society. In coming from, although we have democracy in India, coming from a very good family that allowed a lot of freedom, the society around you determines a lot of factors. And so having the freedom to think, having a society that values that freedom makes a big difference in how you can portray your art also. I think that was one point. And the second point to what Maritza had said before, when you're talking about your loyalty, your loyalty to your values, the question is, then what does it mean to be a man? And what are those essential qualities that really define us as human beings? I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rupali. All right, so I'm starting the breakout rooms. They're going to last, oh, wait a minute, Brendan. So we're going to do Brendan, and then we'll do breakout rooms for about 15 minutes, and then we can come back, share our takeaways, and ask questions. Brendan, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. I haven't read everything by Victor Hugo, but I've read a lot of his books, and actually have just discovered a lot of his plays have been translated into English as well. And I'm starting to work my way through those. And yeah, I absolutely love Victor Hugo. I think he's an incredible writer, and just the love that he has for humanity is always really striking to me. I was reading an essay of his this past week, and he was talking about Homer, saying that one of the referring to Homer as being one of the geniuses who can resolve the beautiful problem, perhaps the most beautiful problem of all in art, the true picture of humanity obtained by a grandizing man. That is to say, creating the real in the ideal. And I think that's just such a core to Romanticism, and Victor Hugo's Romanticism especially. Loving humanity and putting so much focus on humanity achieving the ideal. And even if all of his philosophy and sense of life doesn't entirely line up with Ayn Rand's, definitely I see Ayn Rand as that continuation, as the 20th century version of Hugo. And I'm definitely hoping that we can find a 21st century Hugo as well.
Thank you, Brendan. I want to say a couple of things. I mean, this love for humanity, you can see that in all his work. And the point that Joia had made is that he loves both the ideal and the concrete. And you can see in the variety of his work, whether it is 93 or Les Mis that we have been talking about, Toilers of the Sea, they're set in completely different context. It's Toilers of the Sea is mostly kind of human versus nature, and with a very interesting kind of human problem on the side. Then you have got Man Who Laughs, you've got Notre Dame. Each of them is such a different context, and he lovingly portrays all the details of each of them. And the theme of grandeur, I think, just flows through all of it. Wonderful. So I'm starting the breakout rooms now. We'll come back here in 15 minutes to share our takeaways and take all the questions. Starting the breakout rooms now. Welcome back, folks. Welcome back. So it's time for takeaways and questions. So you can either just give takeaway, just question, or both. You can go ahead and type an exclamation mark in chat to do that. We've got 4 rules: type exclamation mark or raise your hand in Zoom in order to speak. Number 2, keep on topic. Number 3, be brief. And number 4, speak your mind. Feel free to disagree with anybody on anything and do so courteously. But before Joe, I have a question for Rob that I'm trying to ask him. Rob, firstly, fantastic presentation. Just loved it. So I want to ask you a
See
question.
why I gave him all my time?
Yes, that was
Yeah.
a good decision. That was a good decision. It's like, this is his only opportunity of talking more than you on the topic of art.
Exactly.
So I liked your observations about the themes, and I agree with all of them. So the question is epistemological. How do you identify a theme of a novel?
Oh gosh, I'm not sure if I have general advice on that, but I think that, I mean, maybe Joia or Maritza would have something to add on this. I think that I look for basically what's the common thread that you find among all the main characters. That's the thing that is the most reliable thing. If you look at all the main characters, ask what is going on with them, what's their arc the character is going through, what's the conflict they're facing. If you find similarities among that gives you a direction to go for the theme. But I'm not sure I have anything
Wonderful. Okay.
more
I
deeper
think
profound to say about that.
we've talked, Shrikant, before in Rides from the Airport about different ways of thinking about things, whether it's pattern recognition or logical steps. And I think when it comes to reading a sense of life from a person or from a novel or from a work of art or even architecture, it leans into that pattern recognition part where you need to look for consistency of patterns. And Victor Hugo, we're seeing the consistency of how he is treating every character, that no matter how low they are, they have the heroicness in their soul. That's where you can see the themes emerge from, by seeing it in the patterns throughout.
Wonderful. Thank you. Next up is going to be Joe. Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, thank you to the panelists. I, was going to comment at the end, but I think you really captured everything so beautifully that I really couldn't have added anything to it. And I really appreciated Rob's explanation of how the everyday man's values, and their dedication to them, and how Victor Hugo actually puts you to that test. Let me just start with a quick question. One of the things that I thought about is that, and somebody had put it in the chat, is the idea that Victor Hugo's mother was a Catholic loyalist and his father was a Republican. And so that, how did that shape maybe some of the characters and what he wrote about and their dedication to their values and the conflicts that they had? And that's just a side question. But then just as an idea, that some of the other things that I thought about is just how the metaphysical and the concrete, as Joia had pointed out, Victor Hugo can really tie those two together so beautifully with characters like Jean Valjean and the storytelling, and link it to a systemic level of a revolution and how challenging that really is. It's the everyday interactions that he's able to show through people's people's behaviors, and how that manifests itself on a systemic level is it's quite remarkable. Now, I've only seen Les Mis, so I am somewhat limited in making any kind of broad statements, but I really thought that was the most, and I see a lot of elements of the hero's journey and a lot of those things as well. But I would just like to pose that question, if anybody is aware of how his upbringing may have influenced his ability to write, how people held their values so dear in his plays. So.
Okay, any of the panelists want to respond? I don't think any of us kind of know Victor Hugo's life too deeply. So I don't But the thing I would recommend, Joe, is that it's well worth reading Victor Hugo, because though as much as I like the musical and the movie reproductions, this idea of grandeur of what is possible to a human being, the way it comes through in his writing is far more profound. So that's what I would say. So it's going to be Maritza, followed by Rob and Sherri.
Can I say something else? Which is that you can see that fleshed out in a lot of the minor characters. So I fully believe this thing about how he grew up with, a royalist mother and a Republican father, because it's so much of that is reproduced, especially in Les Miserables. A character who doesn't really appear in the musical or only the background of the musical is Monsieur Gillenormand. Pardon me for butchering the French, but it's Marius's grandfather. And Marius's grandfather is an ultra royalist, like the most extreme form of royalist. And he's raised his grandson, who then, for various reasons, becomes this fire-breathing Bonapartist Republican. And then one of the big stories in the background of it is this sort of rapprochement where Marius is almost killed in the revolution, and his grandfather takes it, after having thrown him out years earlier, takes him back in and nurses him back to health, and begins to realize that his love for his grandson is more important than the fact that he's going to have to get heartburn from what he has to say about politics. And I think that so you can definitely see that those issues working themselves out in the novels.
And if I had to guess, I would think that Victor Hugo learned to fiercely defend both sides from if we're looking at it from there. But I did want to say, something else that's a theme for both 93 and for Les Mis is he presents and projects this like fierce mama cub vision as a mother. Like, I mean, as somebody who, my folks passed away when I was very, very young. And so seeing in writing this, like, I feel like it is such an ideal. It's like, oh, I want that. It does. It almost fills you with a longing as someone who finds themselves without. I mean, because he has in 93, the mother who is robbed of her 3 children, she walks almost without sense. Like there's this beacon pulling her forward as she's searching for her children. She's doing the impossible. If you were to put it into real life, you're like, there's no way. Because she's walking through like battlefields in like towards the battle, because she has one thought and one alone, that she must find her children. And in Les Mis, this poor woman finds herself in the most destitute of situations, and she makes these horrible choices that are like, in her mind, it's the only option, because the other option is to fail to provide for her child. And for her, that's not an option. And I would like to, I mean, I don't know for a fact, but somehow something to do with his upbringing provided the impetus or, the muse to create these like super heroic mother figures, at least from my perspective. I see it.
Wonderful. There aren't many questions, so we get to ask questions to each other. No, wait a minute. There are quite folks. If you have questions or comments, go ahead and put that. Your questions will take priority over our questions. Rupali, go ahead.
Okay, I was just waiting. So I wanted to talk about one part towards the end of the chapter. She talks about the characters, that they are superbly conscious, fully aware of their motives and desires, fully focused on reality and acting accordingly. And, I think many people, when I've talked about Victor Hugo, they have said, well, it's not possible. When I talk about Ayn Rand, not practical. And I wonder if, with so much noise around us, are we not aware of our motives, our desires, sorry about that. But staying focused on goals, creating, being aware of values. Sorry, that's, so I'll leave it at that, how did he define his characters and how in that world could they be so focused on their motives and desires?
Okay, who would like to answer that?
Okay. Sorry, I was panicking, reaching for my phone while yours was going off. So
I think we all were.
I'm so sorry. That's
No,
my
it's fine. Somebody
I totally
had
expected it was like, oh, that must be mine.
no,
And
somebody
started-
had a question for Rupali that time. Go ahead.
But how do you create these characters? Let me think.
I think he had to have seen.
Yeah.
Back to what Maritza was saying. He had to have seen people of heroic character at some level.
I think the way actually I think about it is he lived in an extremely tumultuous time,
Mm.
right? So he sort of grew up in the wake of the French Revolution and lived through several other, at least three other attempts to create another French Revolution. So it was he lived in a time of immense bitter conflict too, because you had the ultra royalists and you had the communists, the French, the Paris Commune, and you had people with vastly different viewpoints on politics and values and religion. Actually, something we don't appreciate
today.
Sherri was saying, kind of like today.
Mm-hmm.
I think even more so than today. It's like it was
yeah.
even worse because I think it's because it's so far in the rearview mirror. People don't realize the extent to which the 19th century was this huge battleground over religion in France.
Mm-hmm.
That you went from, in the 17th century, even up through the 18th century, under the French kings, you had this tremendous, union of church and state, and the kings being the enforcers of religion and people being, put to death and executed. There's some guy who was executed, burned at the stake along with a copy of Voltaire's dictionary because this is the corrupting influence on him. And this is the sort of thing that was happening up to the 18th century. This tremendous establishment of religion and persecution of Protestants and all that, and then religion being sort of cast down by these oftentimes very secular forces in the French Revolution, and then this whole conflict through the 19th century of going back and forth on that from the Catholic loyalists against the secular Republicans, and the tremendous bitterness of the conflict. And I think coming up through such a tumultuous period, he had a lot of opportunities to see people who were extremely dedicated and willing to tear up the paving stones and build barricades in 1832, in 1848, in 1870. All throughout this, they were willing to do this. So he lived in a tumultuous time that forced people in reality to go to the extremes of what they stood for and what their values were. Mm-hmm. And he was the one sort of almost reporting on that in a way.
I want to add one thing. This is I just want to underline the power of art to rise above whatever is going on. Like, people get caught up in social media, people get caught up in politics, and they lose track of what human beings are. And that's what something like this, something like somebody like Victor Hugo can bring back. That's what he can give you. That's this is what you are, because otherwise you get completely consumed by the noise. All right. So firstly, I want to talk about what's coming up. So firstly, the next week, we are going to do the chapter on goal of my writing. That is my favorite chapter of this whole book. And that is the chapter towards which the entire book is going. Mm-hmm. Normally she would have put it right in the beginning, but she put it deliberately at the end because she wanted to establish the ground for it. It's really the culmination of it. of this whole book. So that's next. After that, yes.
Can I jump in really quickly here and answer a question that was asked in the chat?
Sure.
So somebody asked about, they said they can totally see Rourke as a heroic being, but they don't necessarily see how a prostitute could possibly be a heroic being. I would like to address that because I actually feel very strongly about this. It's because it's about the possibility and about the focus on one's internal value. Now, when we're looking at Les Mis and we're looking at, this is a mother who found herself with a child. Now, she didn't know that these people were lying. She thought her child had this grave illness and was going to die unless this sum of money could be obtained. And remember that she refused the prostitution. First, she decided to sell her hair and her teeth. I mean, she did it the backwards way, right? But she found herself in a position where she went prostitute because she saw no other options. And that is almost like the opposite of what Rupali mentioned of, there's so much noise, but it also begs that question. If we are not aware an option exists, does it exist to us? I'm not trying to answer that question here, but I'm just saying that is an internal struggle that we all deal with in day to day. It's when people are talking about the inequality of different people and circumstances, this is the eternal question. If one doesn't see that an option exists, the only thing we can do is choose the option that will best align itself with that with which we hold most dear. And unfortunately for this poor woman, prostitution was the answer for her because she couldn't get money any other way, and she needed to pay to save her child. And that's why I can see that her heroism on the same level as Howard Rourke's refusing to allow them to change one little column in his architecture. It's that same fierce devotion to that which you hold to be so dear to yourself. I hope that helps. Thanks, Shrikant.
I could throw in something else on that because I think it's really important to understand Hugo's method on this, which is that in real life, maybe there would be other options, but in a Hugo novel, he arranges things such that there are no other options because that's the whole point. The point is he wants to take, like I said, he wants to take all of his characters and push them totally to the edge and deliberately put them in a situation where there are no better options, right? So in reality, sure, there might be better options. There might be a way to avoid this. But, partly he's trying to draw attention to the desperate poverty and the plight of the common man in the early 19th century, which was much, we can't even conceive of the kind of poverty that was normal in that society. But it's also because even if there were better options and there was a way to be saved and a way for somebody to get out of the situation, he's not going to let his character have that because the point of it is it's this laboratory where you're taking, it's like imagine yourself materials testing, right? You're taking a material and you're doing everything you can to push it to its failure rate. That's basically what his novels are, a literary laboratory in which he takes the material of the human spirit and he pushes it to its failure point and sees exactly how much can it take? How strong can this possibly be? And so the whole point is, if you think, well, maybe something different could happen. And yeah, in real life, maybe it couldn't, but this is the laboratory where Hugo is inducing the worst possible conditions for a human being to live under and then seeing what they do.
Wonderful, thank you. So next we are going to talk about the goal of my writing. The week after that, Rob is going to do something in conjunction with the last chapter. So Rob, can you describe what you're going to do?
Well, I don't know entirely what I'm going to do, but you had asked me to talk about style of writing, and I know this very well from more from a nonfiction writer's perspective than from a fiction writer's perspective, but I think there's a lot of similarities. And there's, and I'm very well, even though I'm writing nonfiction stories, there is an element of sense of life and an element of inducing a sense of life in the readers that I do. So I want to go over that. And it seems appropriate to put it with the goal of my writing, because she's describing a writer at work.
It's going with the simplest.
The simplest thing in the world. Because she's showing you in this short story, she's showing you a writer at work. So I think it sort of fits in somewhat with that.
Absolutely. For people who don't know, Rob is an amazing writer, and I've learned a lot from him, from his writing courses, and I'm sure so has Joia. So I'm really looking forward to this, and so has Sherri. So really looking forward to that. The week after that, Sherri, you're going to do something, and you know what you're going to do.
Well, I know in general terms, not in specifics. So having learned how to write from Rob taught a great writing course. And a few of us might have been on that course or taken it one way or another. I've had the great luxury of having that writing course for close to 30 years now, which has been quite a treat. So I used to write a column called Things of Beauty. And if you know the poem, Things of Beauty, that's where the idea really stems from. It's the idea that you can find, it's kind of an antidote to what Shrikant was talking about social media these days, that the power of art and the power of beautiful things, that you can find them. They're out there everywhere. There's an overwhelming number of them. And the value of looking for them and discovering them and actively observing and figuring out why they're so great is a wonderful sense of life boost, but also it's just a huge improvement in daily life. So I wrote this column for, I don't know how many years I wrote it.
3 or 4 years.
And stopped when we had little babies, because I knew for sure that I was going to be writing about the boys all the time. And I didn't think everybody wanted to hear that. Anyway, so I'm in the process of reviving that. And so this will be a way that we can kind of take a look at maybe a couple of the old pieces, a couple of new things. I don't just talk about art. Sometimes I'll talk about art just in, say, a painting. I might look at the color, just the color, and we'll deep into that. Sometimes it's about tools. Quite a lot of times it was about tools. And sometimes it's about photography, natural landscapes, things like that. So we'll do a little sampling of those, and if that'll be fun.
Excellent. So those are the next 3 meetups in this series. And after that, we are going into Louis Sullivan. Okay. Louis Sullivan is one of the greatest thinkers. I think he's had more impact on my thinking than anybody else. And it is very difficult to actually communicate what he has done. It's a very simple idea, form follows function, but it's a very profound idea. And so I have cheated a couple of times by having, getting the big guns, Sherri Tracinski to help me present the ideas. So there are 2 meetups out there already on the YouTube channel. So you should watch them. But what we're going to do is that we're going to do something better than that. We're going to go through his book, Kindergarten Chats. So you can go ahead and get the book and start reading it with us. Joia, Maritza, and hopefully many other people are going to join us. So Rupali is going to join. Rupali's architect. She's very familiar with Louis Sullivan. So we're going to get all of that. And it's a profound work. It's not about architecture. It is about design. It's not about design. It is about thinking. It is not about thinking. It is about kind of metaphysics of what human beings are and what we do. So that's what it is about. So it's a very profound work. And that's what we're going to go to next. All right. One last thing I want to say. I want to draw your attention to an amazing meetup tomorrow at 12 o'clock. Mark Stahlberg, who is the president of the Center for Study of Digital Life, is going to be here. He's one of the most profound thinkers I have met. What we'll be talking about is what is actually happening today in terms of how is the digital technology, the internet, changing the way in which we are thinking and operating, and what are its consequences. He's an amazing polymath. He's a student of Aristotle, Aquinas, so he has like the entire philosophy pat down. He also has, Julian Jaynes, who is one of my favorite thinkers, who talks about power of language. He is a student of Marshall McLuhan, who is a student of who studies media. And what does TV do to you? If you watch too much TV, what happens to you? If you do a lot of writing, what happens to you? How does your mind work if you're doing that? And what are the consequences of it? Not at not just at the individual level, but at the social level as well. And he's going to use that as a base, and then we're going to be talking about the future. And actually, the future is already here in the sense that a lot of the changes that we expect in technology are currently operative. And that's what this center studies in great amount of detail. So that's what is coming up at 12 o'clock tomorrow. So don't miss that. All right, folks. So thank you very much. Any panelists, would you like to bring up anything else?
I've got one thing that's been running around in my head after a conversation we had in the breakout room with, especially with Rupali and Ash, which is talking about how the freedom of thought in a sort of an enlightenment influenced society, or a freedom of thought in a free society, is such a crucial context for the way Hugo creates his stories and the way he approaches the world, that you have characters who are acting on their individual choices for their individual values and overcoming all obstacles to pursue them. And it struck me that, one of the themes I've been talking about throughout this book, reading the Romantic Manifesto, and it's something I'm fascinated about with Ayn Rand's views, is the extent to which she was trying to combine or synthesize the Enlightenment ideas with the aesthetics of the Romantic era, which are generally considered to be philosophically opposite, and the one was a reaction against the other, and here she's trying to bring them together. And I think that's an interesting angle on this, is that she was taking the 18th century Enlightenment ideas that sort of knocked down traditional society and knocked down the idea of tradition as the basis for society, that everything had to be held to a rational standard, and just because something was traditional didn't mean it was binding on anyone. And so the individual could make his own course based on his own judgment. And that leads to this tremendous sense of individual freedom, and individuals able to act on their own values and pursue their values and do so against all obstacles, which was central to the Romantic movement. So she's taking something that is an Enlightenment value and connecting it to something that was a Romantic era value, and showing the unity, the thing that connects those things, instead of viewing them, as most people did, as opposites that were fighting against each other. I think it ties into a much broader theme of Ayn Rand's aesthetics and of her philosophy.
Excellent. I also want to point out one thing about the historical context of the Romantic movement. 19th century. Like 19th century is actually a very remarkable time, because before that, life of a grandchild was not that different from a life of a grandfather. You're suddenly going, for the first time, you can actually see what human beings can achieve. So in terms of demonstrating what human mind can do in transforming human life, 19th century is where there is the concretes of it. For example, Ayn Rand has said that I would not be able to come up with my philosophy before that, because this is like a radical transformation. And the Romanticism kind of carries some of that excitement and the kind of confidence in in man's mind, and the ambition and value seeking, and all of that. So I think that's a large point. Maritza or Joia, do you guys have any comments, any general comments?
I'm just going to reiterate that I'm definitely looking forward to next week, because this next chapter is my favorite chapter too. I think it really is the climax of the entire book. So I hope everybody comes and joins us for this next chapter.
Joia, you like this book so much. I think for every chapter you've said the same thing.
No. But the last chapter really is my favorite chapter.
Okay.
Because it all builds up. It all builds up to this last chapter.
Okay, wonderful. Maritza.
I'm gonna second what Joia said. Next week is gonna be quite the treat here. It's like you said. This is this here. Where's Oh, he's not here. There's somebody who always talks about how these are all separate articles. This is the one that brings it all together. So if you've been wondering where the heck we're going with this, we're gonna tell you next week.
Wonderful. All right, go ahead.
Lloyd is here next week because he's the one who keeps bringing that up.
What's that?
You have to make sure Lloyd is here next week because he's the one who keeps bringing that up.
That's fine. He can watch the video. That's why we have the video. All right, folks. Thank you very much. It's delightful as always. See ya. Bye.
Bye.